The bells tolled for the dying, yet the silence for the tortured was louder still. I have carried that silence across oceans and decades, a weight heavier than any chain. When I speak of it now, it is not to disturb the dead but to honor the forgotten, those whose screams were swallowed by the damp stones of England's hidden chambers and whose names were swept from the ledgers as if they had never breathed. London in those years reeked of smoke and rot. Plague carts creaked through alleys slick with ash and refuse, the cries of the stricken mingling with the chants of priests who dared not touch the dying. Fires smoldered in villages where superstition flared brighter than reason. Behind the heavy oaken doors of ancient abbeys, whispers traveled farther than ships, rumors of Spanish inquisitors who had perfected cruelty and now sold their methods like merchants of terror. I walked those streets as a child, small enough to hide beneath a bread wagon, yet old enough to feel the shadow of dread. Eleanor Whitcomb was the first face that burned itself into my memory. She was a midwife with gentle hands and a voice that calmed even the fiercest labor pains. To the frightened mothers of Surrey she was a blessing, to the magistrates she was an unholy threat. When fever swept through the parish and infants perished in their sleep, it was Eleanor they blamed. They said she carried charms under her apron, that she whispered Latin to the moon. I remember the night they came for her, the lantern light quivering across her thatched roof like an omen. She did not plead. She only asked that someone care for the orphaned babe she had been nursing back to health. Among those who watched was Father Anselm, a thin priest with eyes the color of storm clouds. To most he was merely a scribe of parish records, but I had seen him linger near the docks where sailors spoke of Spain's dread devices. Anselm believed the truth belonged to parchment, not rumor. He kept a hidden ledger beneath the altar floor, sketching each grotesque instrument as he learned of it, the pear of anguish, shaped like a fruit but blooming inward with iron petals to rend the flesh, the iron spider, a clawed implement meant to tear with a single twist, the heretic's fork, a cruel yoke that forced silence by pressing its prongs beneath chin and breastbone. These were not the fevered imaginings of drunks. The drawings bled with the precision of a man who wished he could forget. When Eleanor was seized, Anselm slipped into the crowd, his face unreadable. I clung to the hem of his cloak, invisible in the press of bodies. We followed the constables through a maze of alleys to the abbey's lower chambers where the air was colder than a grave. There, beneath vaults blackened by centuries of candle smoke, I saw the shapes of machines half-shrouded in burlap. Chains rattled as if the walls themselves disapproved. The accusations were as thin as smoke. They claimed Eleanor brewed plague from herbs, that she danced with the devil in the woods beyond the mill. Each question was a lash. When she refused to confess, the inquisitor's assistant gestured toward the covered forms. They did not need to reveal the pear or the fork, the mere suggestion was enough to turn marrow to ice. I remember the quiet more than any scream, the measured breathing of men who believed they were righteous, the soft creak of Eleanor's chair as she refused to bow. Days passed. The plague tightened its grip on the city, and panic demanded blood. Eleanor remained unbroken, her eyes like embers in the dark. Father Anselm visited her cell under the guise of prayer. I heard his whispered Latin, not of condemnation but of witness. History will forget, he told her, but heaven remembers. He pressed a folded paper into her bound hands, though I never learned what words it held. On the morning they took her away, a fog hung so thick the cathedral spire vanished. They said she died of fever before the trial could conclude. I did not believe them. The body carted to the potter's field was wrapped too neatly, too quickly. Whether she perished under the iron or slipped beyond their reach by sheer will, none could say. Her name was struck from the parish rolls. The market women crossed themselves when it was spoken. The silence became another form of torture. Father Anselm called for me that evening. His face was drawn, his ink-stained fingers trembling. He handed me a small leather packet, sealed with wax dark as dried blood. You will leave this place, he said, his voice a rasp. Take this across the sea. Do not open it until you stand on new soil. The truth must outlive us. I asked if he would come, but he only shook his head. Someone must remain to remember. Within a fortnight the plague worsened. Bells tolled morning and night as whole streets were boarded shut. I moved through the city like a ghost, the packet hidden beneath my coat. At the docks the air smelled of tar and salt and the faint hope of survival. Sailors shouted destinations, Jamaica, Boston, Salem, names that meant nothing yet promised escape. I bartered my mother's silver cross for passage on a ship bound for the Massachusetts Bay. As the vessel pulled away, I looked back once to see Father Anselm on the wharf, a lone figure in the mist. He raised a hand but did not wave, as though blessing a grave. The tide carried us into darkness, the city's wails fading to a memory. I pressed the leather packet to my chest and felt the faint ridges of drawings within, the cruel pear, the spider's claws, the fork that silenced prayers. I have not spoken Eleanor's name aloud in many years, yet her courage walks beside me still. The world believes the plague claimed her, that superstition died with the century. But I know better. The instruments of the Inquisition were not bound by borders, their shadow crossed the ocean with me, hidden in the folds of that secret ledger. And somewhere beyond the horizon, in the new world that calls itself free, the silence waits to be broken. Snow fell like sifted ashes, softening the crooked roofs of Salem village and muting the world to a hush that felt almost holy. Church bells tolled across the frozen marsh, each note sharp as a blade. Hannah stepped from the forest edge into that iron-cold air, her breath a fleeting cloud. Years had passed since she fled the plague-stricken streets of London, but the leather packet beneath her cloak pressed against her ribs like a second heartbeat, unchanged by time or ocean. Inside lay the sketches and words Father Anselm had entrusted to her, the secret record of a cruelty older than this new land, darker than any winter night. The villagers moved quickly between doorways, eyes down, wary of shadows. Fear here had a different accent but the same taste, salt and smoke and the bitterness of suspicion. Hannah felt it in the way the air tightened when she passed, the way mothers clutched children closer. Whispers followed her boots across the frosted common. She had crossed an ocean to escape the Inquisition's reach, yet its echo greeted her like an old adversary. Salem's magistrate spoke of specter evidence, claiming to see spirits tormenting the godly. Hannah heard in their words the same reasoning that once condemned Eleanor Whitcomb. She listened as neighbors accused neighbors, their testimonies built from dreams and grudges. Stocks stood ready in the square, and heavy stones waited for those who refused to confess. In the flicker of the meeting-house lanterns she saw, with a jolt of dread, the shapes of the Spanish devices she had carried across the sea. The pear of anguish, the iron spider, the heretic's fork, they had not crossed the Atlantic in iron and wood, but in imagination, in the contagious language of fear. She lodged at a widow's house on the outskirts, where the wind rattled loose shutters through the night. By candlelight she unsealed the packet for the first time. The ink had faded but the images were unmistakable, the cruel petals of the pear, the clawed spider, the fork that forced silence between breastbone and chin. Beneath each drawing Father Anselm's script unfurled like a prayer and a warning. Hannah traced the letters with a trembling finger. This was no relic of another continent. It was a mirror. The next day she attended a hearing, drawn by a restless compulsion. The meeting-house smelled of pine pitch and fear. A young woman, barely more than a girl, stood accused of consorting with the devil. Her hands shook as she swore her innocence. The magistrate, Jonathan Mather, a man with eyes as cold as the sea, leaned forward with the hunger of a predator. When Hannah glimpsed the sketches of instruments beneath his papers, her own drawings, unmistakably copied, her blood ran cold. Somehow, word of the packet had reached him. After the hearing he approached her in the snowy yard, his breath steaming like smoke from a forge. "You are not of this village," he said, voice low. "Yet you carry the memory of Europe's fires. I have read of the Spanish methods. They were effective." His gaze lingered, curious and calculating. "Fear is a language all souls understand. Perhaps you might share more of what you know." Hannah's throat tightened. She thought of Father Anselm's warning, the truth must outlive us, but it must not be wielded as a weapon. "Some truths," she replied, "are only poison." She turned from him, but his voice followed like a curse. "Poison can cleanse," he said. "It can purge the ungodly." That night the town erupted in cries. Another girl arrested, another name shouted into the dark. Hannah pressed her forehead to the frost-lined window and saw torchlight bobbing like malevolent stars. The notes felt heavier than lead. She imagined them in Mather's hands, fueling his appetite for order through terror. The Atlantic had not drowned the old world's cruelty, it had only given it new soil. The trials grew more frenzied. In the crowded meeting-house Hannah watched a man refuse to plead, and the magistrates condemned him to be pressed beneath stones until he spoke. The creak of the boards, the muffled groans, the hiss of lantern wicks, it was all too familiar. Her mind filled with the iron flowers of Spain, with Eleanor's steady eyes in the London dungeon. Silence, once a refuge, became a weapon. Every withheld word was twisted into proof of guilt. Every scream fed the crowd's conviction. On the coldest morning of that cursed winter, Hannah felt her resolve crack like river ice. She approached the hollow oak at the edge of the marsh, the place where children whispered fairies lived. Kneeling in the snow, she pried open a cavity in the trunk and slid the packet inside, sealing it with a fistful of frozen moss. The tree accepted the burden without protest. She stood there for a long moment, the wind lifting her cloak, listening to the distant toll of the bell that summoned another soul to judgment. When she returned to the village, executions had begun. Ropes creaked from the gallows like mournful instruments. Faces in the crowd were blank with a fervor that chilled her more than the winter air. Hannah kept her head bowed, the secret safely hidden where no magistrate's hand could reach. She thought of Father Anselm, of Eleanor whose courage outshone the plague's darkness, of all the women whose names would never be written. Snow began again, a quiet shroud over the square. Hannah whispered a prayer that the truth would sleep until a gentler age could bear it. And not a single page in the New World's history dared to mention the women who bled for a kingdom they had never seen.